Your book was obviously read by everyone, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and it's kind of the intellectual backbone of the lean startup movement. And it was always interesting because there's obviously a lot of important wisdom there for how Law of the Valley worked, but it always seemed to be pretty different to me than how the defense side of things worked, right?
This breakdown of Palantir's defense game will change how you see military innovation. Check this video out.
So it's kind of interesting talking to you about defense now because in some ways Palantir was like a fat startup, as was SpaceX, as
Right.
was and even Anduril in some ways. So a lot of these defense things, it's like you can't quite do those things the lean startups get you. Is that how you think about it too? Are the principles still apply, or is it different?
Well, what's really funny is, I of all things, I use SpaceX as an example of how you actually can build. Fancy word is an ambidextrous organization, a $20 word that you use in universities to mean can you chew gum and walk at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, can you execute? That is, do continual processes and incremental innovation. At the same time, you could do crazy things in the
Mm-hmm.
same large organization. And of course, I think most people listening understand that SpaceX is launching out of 3 launch pads, 2 at Kennedy, 1 at Vandenberg, and that's operational excellence. Those Falcon 9s are popping off. We might hit 120 this year, maybe we'll hit
Wow.
Elon's 144. But in any case, they don't screw around. There's a book, and that process needs to be fail safe. But
Mm-hmm.
when we look at Starship, Elon's model is we're not blowing stuff up, we're not innovating, and if we're not blowing them up fast enough, we're not innovating fast enough. Different culture, different people, different risk profiles. But the big idea is everybody understands Falcon 9 pays your salary, but Starship will pay your pension.
Yep.
And that innovation stuff that's at the edge will move to the core. And they're not separate organizations, even though they're connected horizontally. The learning is going back and forth. The DoD actually does some of this by hacking their own system when we create black programs. So, so if you want to beat the bureaucracy, you put it in a SCIF or a SAP program. And if you've been in some of those, they do operate with speed. Does that make sense? That is, we hack our own
Yep.
system. We have SOCOM.
Yep.
You're a startup. Where's the first place you go? You go to SOCOM, or you go to Black Program, or you go to CIA or somebody else.
If the Pentagon has to hack its own system just to get results, doesn't that tell us something's fundamentally broken? Palantir thrives because it operates outside that red tape. Isn't this the kind of ambidextrous innovation the defense world desperately needs, where Falcon 9 pays the salary, but Starship secures the future?
In some ways, SpaceX still is doing a lot of what you talked about with failing fast and everything. It's just doing it in a different way. That's interesting.
Yes. And so it's possible to build this in the DoD. We've done it before. That is, you need organizations that operate the core in execution, but are capable of actually creating innovation. And the problem is that at the end of the day, it's leadership. If you don't have leadership that understands the difference between execution and innovation, and I mean disruptive innovation, different clock speed, different people, and whatever, you just tend to do the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And who understood that? Bill Perry understood that as SecDef. Ash Carter understood that as SecDev. I would contend most of the rest were political appointees who couldn't tell you innovation from like.
When we were innovating, Steve, for Palantir, we studied a lot, obviously talked to a lot of people, and there were really 2 parts, I'd say. One part was like we'd had a vision, we're like, this is the correct answer. You need these nodes that have dynamic ontologies. They can over time they're going to allow them to talk to each other between the US, between allies, and you need to have this platform that does data integration, and you need to have the platform that does collaboration. We had all this big vision, but then there was also like every week or 2 we'd fly out and show people things, and we get pushed back and we'd iterate. So I guess there was like an iterative part of it, but there was also just like this like if you build it they will come like conviction we had, and we just kept pushing, and it turned out to be right, and it took many years. It seems like a different way to build a company than some of the other things in Valley, or does that relate to how you think about things as well?
That's in fact, the miss of Sisyphus pushing that ball uphill. And the good news is you guys were one of the few that got it up the hill,
Mm-hmm.
but you were fighting against a system that wasn't designed to
Yep.
intake
Yep.
radical innovation. And
Yep.
the point I just made previously is we can actually get the DoD organized to do that. This
Yep.
goes all the way back to us getting together as a community and explaining to Congress how we should organize this, and more importantly, who should be running these things.
Yep.
Right? Doug Beck should not be running R&E. Heidi Shue should not be running DIU. They're different people, different processes, different clock speed. If we could get that idea through, we need both.
Yep.
We need to have so imagine a DOD that actually had that culture when you started Palantir.
Palantir's path was part vision, part insurgency. They weren't waiting for permission to innovate. They were dragging the system forward, one demo at a time. And the Red Queen model? It's what real change looks like, a new playbook for how defense and innovation collide. Instead of scattered visits, it's centralized acceleration. Founders and decision makers in the same room at the same speed.
I would have owned more of the company by the time we got there.
Right. Well, right. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, one of the things we did 6 years ago was to start a conference and to get the innovators and the senior leadership in the DoD together, called the Red Queen Conference out here at my ranch, and we're going to have it this week on Wednesday and Thursday. And so, and here's the other part that Silicon Valley failed. So those senior leaders, we got admirals and generals, we got the head of a countries, joint chiefs of staff out here, whatever. They would then leave our little conference, and then they go visit individual companies in Silicon Valley. They'd all scatter. And it took me 6 years of running this before I went, why don't we invite the companies here across a set of VCs
Yeah.
in a set of areas? They've said, do you know there's no Silicon Valley One Defense trade show in the Valley that
That's
when
pretty.
people come out and visit, or even for the Reagan conference or something, why don't we all get together across all the portfolios and show our wares in a
You know, a lot of the best ones are still in El Segundo or elsewhere in the country. But you're right, there are some important things right in the valley too to be seen.
Well,
Yeah.
so wait a
Yeah.
minute. If at the
Yeah.
Reagan conference, you got all those folks. Why isn't there a trade show in a building across the street?
Yeah. I am on the board of the library. I can't make any excuses. I'll ask him and see.
No,
That's
no.
fascinating.
Listen, it took me 6 years of having all these, and then going, "Where are you guys going?" "Oh, we're going to go visit Palantir." "Oh, we're going to go see Andrew."
You know what the secret answer is that the very top companies that are doing well get into those places like the Reagan thing anyway.
Of course,
Which, yeah.
but
Yeah.
senior leadership doesn't understand where those companies fit in the ecosystem unless we expose them to the ecosystem.
Honestly, the fact that there's still no centralized defense trade show in Silicon Valley is telling. Innovation is happening, but distribution of understanding isn't. By the time they walk into a Reagan conference session, decisions are already being made based on partial pictures. Red Queen fixes that. It builds a real operating model for how defense meets disruptive tech.
No, that's fair. I think that's the right thing to do.
Right? Every VC wants to show them just their portfolio and baby. But I'm just pointing out that there's mutual interest of them seeing everything across the space. Why? Because, Joe, think about it. If it's just Andrew, then people could go, we don't like that company, those people piss us off or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, if they say, holy cow, there's an entire ecosystem out here, and we're still buying stuff from Lockheed, or who name your favorite prime, for 1,000x what these in 10 years, there's a whole system to choose from.
As you know, it's a tougher one because there's like a certain bar where you really have to be really, really good to be good enough. And so defense for me is different, Steve, than other areas where it's like, I know every area has like lots of failures, but I feel like it's only the top 10% that are real in a lot of times in these ecosystems because you actually have to have a certain bar you pass to know how to deploy, and then it actually ends up not working, and so you got to be really careful as well not to expose them to lots of crap. I guess is the trade off. There's dialectic there.
So we teach a class called Hacking for Defense, which
Mhm.
Jill Felter and I and Pete Newell
Yeah.
started. It's now in 60 universities, and
Yeah.
so a good number of our students end up trying to sell to the DoDs. And the answer is, I'm kind of agreeing with you.
Yeah.
But we could teach them how to do this, and we do. That
Yeah.
is not just how to get to an MVP and a demo. The DoD has more demos than anybody knows.
Yeah.
But what's the go-to-market strategy of finding the color of money? Or how do you
Yeah.
get a requirement written for just your stuff? Or, gee, who's the saboteur? That is, who actually
Mhm.
has the existing contract? And do you think they're going to sit around just waiting for you to come in, et cetera? You could teach startups this as a process. Because the other mistake that goes on in Silicon Valley is thinking sales to the DoD is just simply complicated enterprise sales in the commercial
Oh, yeah.
market.
It's clear that understanding the intricacies of the DoD and the political landscape is vital for startups to succeed. From navigating the existing contracts to building a solid go-to-market strategy, this is a unique challenge that requires much more than just a great MVP. With the right education and preparation, we could see a transformation in how startups approach defense contracting, ultimately bridging the gap between Silicon Valley innovation and the Department of Defense. That's where the real opportunity lies for the future.